See a few more people have joined us. We'll still give everyone a couple more minutes to log in, but if you want to share in the chat where you're joining us from, you can ask questions in the chat throughout the presentation and we'll answer those once the presentation is over. Thank you. All right, so I see we've got a couple of people joining us all the way from Calgary. Welcome. And we've got a few more people joining us now, so we'll get started in just about a minute. Just a few more people coming in from the waiting room. All right, we will get started. It's great to have you all here today. I'm Jean Lawson, and I am a board director with Hub Cycling. This webinar is organized by Hub Cycling and brought to you by Hub's card-carrying members. Hub's mission is to get more people cycling more often, and they aim to achieve this goal through action, education, events, and research. We would also like to take this time to acknowledge that we are webcasting live from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. A special thank you to our members for making this programming possible. If you'd like to join Hub as a card-carrying member, please visit bikehub.ca/join. And just a few housekeeping rules before we get started. As you listen to the presentation, please use the chat to ask questions. We may not be able to get to all your questions. We'll really be looking for questions that are topical and can be responded to reasonably quickly in this context. We'll give Anaïs, our speaker, some time at the end to answer your questions. Please remember to be considerate and kind. Moderators will be standing by and will remove anyone who's being disruptive to the webinar. And as a reminder, the meeting and all chat messages will be recorded. Please do not record or photograph the meeting unless permission is given. Do not share sensitive or personal information in the chat. We'll be sharing the presentation slides and PDF information with you in a follow-up email later this week. And with that out of the way, I'm excited to welcome registered kinesiologist Anaïs Masbou from Symmetrix Exercise and Rehab to share her knowledge on how we can get our bodies ready for the upcoming Hub Cycling Go by Bike Week and another summer of staying local and exploring BC by bike. Anaïs has a degree in kinesiology from Brock University and works at Symmetrix to help people, including those on bikes, overcome obstacles to achieve their fitness goals. She uses her knowledge of assessment and exercise progression to create fitness programs suited to people's needs. Welcome, Anaïs.
Hi everyone, I'm Anaïs. I work as a professional kinesiologist over at Symmetrix Exercise and Rehab in Yaletown. So just a quick little background about what kinesiologists do. I have my degree, it's kind of more of a sports science background. And basically we do like the exercise part of rehabilitation, kind of all the way up to sports science, or sorry, all the way up to sports performance. So kind of just depends on where you are. If you're recovering from an injury and you need to take it a little bit more easy, all the way up to being able to perform for any kind of sport you might want to do, whether it be cycling, skiing, that kind of thing. Yeah, so I'm gonna start sharing my presentation with you. It's not all a PowerPoint because I know we don't want to spend all our time doing that. I'm going to go over just the kind of basics of presentation information. And then at the end, I'm going to go over some exercises that cyclists can do to help prevent kind of chronic long-term injuries. So I'm just going to share my screen with you guys here. Okay. All right, so take it back a little bit. So the goal of this presentation is going to, number one, first and foremost, reduce your chance of getting an injury. And then secondarily, in the event that you do have an injury, accidents happen, reduce the severity and then decrease your recovery time from an injury. So basically, I've gone and divided injuries into two different types. So acute and chronic injuries. So your acute injuries is going to be something resulting usually from an accident or an incident. You can kind of pinpoint it. You fell off your bike, you know, a bruise, cut, break, that kind of thing. And they're usually shorter term. You know, the recovery time can vary with them, but typically it's not something that's ongoing for a long time. And then after that, we've got our chronic injuries. So these are things that are typically longer lasting. They can kind of come apart in two different ways. It can be non-traumatic. So if something develops over time, like there's no specific event, you just overall develop back pain or develop knee pain, or then it could be ongoing from a traumatic injury. So maybe you had an injury in the past and it's never really healed. You know, that hip pain after you took a fall. Or a really common one in cyclists is that patellofemoral pain, and that's just kind of pain along the front of the knee, and it never really goes away. So we're going to go over, first of all, the prevention of acute cycling injuries. So preventing acute injuries is really more about safety. How do you, if you're a commuter cyclist, make your commutes a lot safer? So, oops, yeah, I'm sorry. Things like your safety equipment on your bike. These are all kind of really obvious ones. Making yourself visible, making yourself audible. You want to have a lot of lights on your bike if you're cycling at night. And then as well, make sure your bike is in order, especially brakes and that kind of thing. Make sure you take your bike in for a tune-up. These are all really obvious things that, you know, I think everyone knows that you should be doing, but I think kind of, you know, you let these things slip. So just especially springtime, beginning of the season, making sure that bike's working well. And then another thing, actually, it was pretty interesting. This is a little bit of research out of Oregon, and actually suggests that even with, you know, more experienced commuter cycling, it doesn't actually impact the rate of accidents that much. Is more about picking the safest route. So, you know, ask yourself, if you're commuting to work, is that shorter bike route, you know, worth the danger that it could put you in? You know, shortcuts aren't always the best thing. And yeah, so I know some cities, a lot of it does have to do with kind of driver's attention. Are they paying attention to cycling lanes? I've actually been hit in a cycling lane before, so those are debatably more safe, but yeah, so simple things like that. And you know, they go a long way. So that's just kind of like about hitting the basics before we get into more complicated stuff. And then, so head injuries. So head injuries are kind of an acute thing that hopefully don't turn into a long-term chronic problem. Things like concussions can go on for a really long time. And then hopefully you don't get any kind of traumatic brain injury, because that's something that turns into something chronic that we can't cure. So according to the National Safety Council, about head injuries are about a third of cycling injuries that come into the hospital. Sorry, a third of cycling injuries reported overall. So you just want to make sure that you have a good helmet. More expensive doesn't necessarily mean better, but you do want to wear a properly fitting helmet. You know, you can ask around a bike shop, you measure the circumference of your head and make sure it matches dimensions that are suggested. And then there also is different types of technology to look for. So for example, the MIPS technology, you know, if you're getting hit on an angle, it helps, or an angle to the side of the head, it helps reduce the impact directly onto the head. So there's lots of good technology with helmets that day, or these days. And I also want to keep it, you know, specific to what you're doing. So, you know, there's helmets that are more specific for mountain biking. There's helmets that are more specific for road cycling. So just try to match your helmet to your activity, because they were designed specifically for types of impacts that you normally see in a sport. And then another thing is wear and tear. So, you know, if you have a helmet that's been sitting in your closet for 15 years, you probably shouldn't be doing or using that. 5 to 10 years is 10 absolute maximum. The Snell Memorial Foundation, which sets guidelines for helmets, actually suggests 5, and they suggest that as a hard limit for your helmets. So it's definitely something to think about, because head injuries are no joke. I've gotten one before, and you know, that $100 or $200 spending on a helmet every 5 years is kind of nothing compared to what it can put you back. So that's just something to think about. So now we're going to go into prevention of chronic cycling injuries. This is what really I'm going to focus on, because it has that exercise rehab component to it. So for chronic injuries, there's a couple things you can do proactively. So your bike fit, you have your performance versus comfort. So this is very much a postural thing. I think everyone kind of looks at the one on the left here and thinks that's a bad posture. But what we're starting to realize more and more about posture is it's not necessarily a good or a bad posture. It's about how much time you're spending in one position. So that 45-degree angle, or, you know, even for people that ride road and triathlon bikes, is even more forwards. It's not necessarily that it's a bad position, but you have to consider how long you're spending in that position. So if you're riding your bike to commute to work, you know, what is your life look like? If you're working, say, more of a construction job where you have to do a lot of bending forwards all day, or you're working at a desk, and I know we're all guilty of this, you're kind of leaning into your computer screen, and you're spending a lot of time in that hunched over position, maybe you want to pick a commuter cycle position that's a little bit higher. So, you know, that's like an extra hour and a half that you're not slouched over, versus say you have a job where you're standing up more. Maybe you're a nurse, maybe you have a job like me, or, you know, a job where you're doing lots of walking around, postal courier type stuff. Then you're a lot more upright. So, you know, that bent over posture isn't necessarily going to be a bad thing, just because you get to change it up. And then this is a question I get asked a lot by clients. They say, getting a bike fitting, is it worth it? For people that do more, I think most road cyclists do go get a bike fitting, but a lot of people wonder, is it worth it for commuting? So just like a quick your feet, your pelvis, and your hands, and then just depending on, you know, every part of those on your bike, your handlebars can be adjusted. So a professional is going to be able to look at that, and they're going to see how you're sitting on there, and if there's any points that are going to cause you pain. And even if you're not getting pain, there could be a position that you're maybe wearing down a joint too much, say your saddle height's too low, and then you're going to want that a little bit higher, because you might not feel pain now, but over time it could cause you some problems in your hips. So I would say getting a bike fitting is well worth the money. You know, I know it's a couple $100s, but it can save you a few $100s in physiotherapy and massage and that kind of thing down the line. And just sometimes I found as well, if you have any kind of underlying pathology, like, you know, you have a nerve problem that just won't go away, there are actually physiotherapists who do bike fittings, and they would be able to kind of look at your hips and say, like, oh, you know, are your feet actually a little bit duck fitted, or is your foot like that just because your hips are a little bit of tight, and then maybe you need some stretching, and then they can provide an adjustment from there. So yeah, go to the bike shop, but if you find that you have any kind of ongoing nerve pain, finding a physiotherapist that can fit your bike is definitely a way you can help solve that. So next part, we're going to get into the exercise portion of it, which is really my expertise. And the first thing I want to start off with is exercise volume. So a lot of injuries happen, especially for the weekend warrior type people, when they go from doing too little to too much. So often someone will come in, they'll be like, oh, I went for a run and, I really hurt my ankle. It was only 5 kilometers. And the first thing I'll ask them is, how far were you running before you did your 5 kilometers? They'll be like, oh, I haven't done anything. I've been on the couch all winter. So of course, 5 kilometers might not seem something to what, or seem like much compared to what you're doing last summer, but you have to really work on easing your way into exercise. So right now in the spring, we're especially, everyone's kind of getting their bike out. They're starting to cycle to work. Think about how far your commute is, and kind of go for the 10% rule. So you only want to add on 10% extra mileage every week. So, if you're doing, 15 kilometers, you only want to add on like a couple kilometers, 15 kilometers every day. You only want to add on a couple kilometers more every day from week to week. So doing that nice and slow. I think people tend to think only from a mechanical standpoint. They'll think, oh, I was running and my joint mechanics were perfectly fine. But we're not machines. So you have to think like your muscles and your tendons, they take time to adapt to load and that kind of thing. Even with perfect form, you can still injure yourself doing too much exercise volume. And volume is just, in cycling terms, it's like the total amount that you've cycled, versus say another metric would be intensity. So I find exercise volume is where people really tend to injure themselves because they start too hard. And then, so we're going into stretching, and I'm gonna turn the presentation off, and I'm gonna actually go over all of the stretching and the exercises with you guys. But kind of the main spots you want to be stretching: hips, quads, your back, chest, and especially their shoulders here, because you're often in that bent forward position, pulling your shoulder blade forwards. You can actually get a little bit of kind of pinching in the front of your shoulder. So it's really important to not neglect your upper body. So stretching is a great place to start, but it's not enough. So a lot of sports science, especially in the last 10 years, is kind of pointing towards strength training for injury prevention. So I often hear people say, oh, I need to stretch my calves. I need to stretch my calves. But really you need to work on strengthening them as well, so they're able to handle a load. And I usually explain this to people. If you were to go bungee jumping and your bungee cord has no tension on it and you jump, right, it's not going to be good because there's going to be so much force. But if your bungee cord is so loose and you jump, you're going to go all the way down, you're going to hit the ground. So you need to have a certain amount of elasticity in your muscles to be able to handle these exercises. So next one here, strengthening for chronic injury prevention. So a lot of people say, I cycle all the time, why do I need to strength train? The problem with cycling is you have your feet locked into these pedals, or even if you don't clip in and you're just pushing down on the pedals, it's a very small range of motion compared to what your hips can fully do. So what we want to do is you want to use these exercises at home or in the gym to fully exercise the muscle right all the way to its end range of motion. And then this can help prevent any kind of tightness. And so even with stretching, your body hasn't necessarily adapted to be strong. So if you think about your hips are stationary on a bike, and you're turning your legs, you don't actually actively work on stabilizing through the side of the hip or loading those muscles with strength training. So your body is really smart. If your hips aren't strong enough to support your hip, if your muscles aren't strong enough to support your hips, what's going to happen is your body's going to tighten hips because it needs to have that, especially from the side, because cycling is very just unidirectional. You're moving in one direction. You still need this stability from the side. And this one, I use a car wheel analogy. So, the car is going straight, the wheels are on straight, but you better hope you have some bolts on the side, because otherwise, the car wheel is going to go flying off. It's the same for your hip. You need that support along the side of the hip that you're not going to get with cycling, but you need it for cycling. And this is where that stretching meets strength training. So yes, of course, you want to stretch those muscles in your hip, but if you want them to stay like that and you want to have support for your activity, you're going to have to work on strengthening through those hips. And then another thing that strength training works on is it works on these natural imbalances that we develop. So a lot of people will be a lot stronger on the right. If you're a lefty, a lot of times you'll be a lot stronger on the left. And with the strength training, it really helps you notice with things like single leg squats, like, oh my God, my left side is so much weaker. And it brings a little bit of attention to balancing those out. And people are always going to have imbalances, but you want to think of how much imbalance can you have before it becomes a problem. And then, so just a quick note about sport specific training. So a lot of people don't realize this, but sport specific training, actually most of it is like not specific. So, it's kind of like a pyramid shape, and kind of 90% is good for all sports. And then it's kind of like the last 10% that's super specific. I think for people just doing activities for fun, like cycling to work, cycling for sport on the weekend, you don't have to have a ton of specificity. So like, what I'm saying is these exercises will help prevent injury from many lower body sports that you play. So whether it be running, skiing, soccer. So they're good exercises to keep you healthy overall. So I'm just going to exit out of this presentation here. Oops, and I'm going to stop sharing screen with you. Okay, and so I just want you guys. Oops.
63. Holy fuck.
Sorry, am I the main screen here? I think so. Okay, hit myself. Perfect. I'm spotlighted so you guys can all get a good view of me. So first one for cyclists, I'm just gonna put this out of the way. Is super basic. It's your just single leg balance. So for a lot of people, they come in and get them to balance on one leg and they're kind of all over the place. So this is just kind of your starting point. You want to be able to balance on one leg, and the older people get without practicing, their balance is just going to slowly go down. It's very trainable though. You should be able to train your single leg balance within like a couple of weeks. And then next progression here would be single leg balance, and you want to close your eyes. So what that's going to do is going to take your vision out of the way, and basically it's your body knowing where you are in space without actually having any visual cues, which is really important for any sports. And also, random facts, it's really good as people age. Falling is the main source of hospitalization as people age. So it's a good one to keep up on. Next one. Oh, and it can also progress it if you have like any kind of mat or like a foam. You have this kind of thing laying around at home, or even just a pillow, just trying to like balance on a board like this is good as well. So that's something you can make the single leg better, because you always want the exercise to be a little bit challenging for you. It keeps things fun in the gym, and so your exercise program doesn't get pretty stale and dry. Next one, so talking about the stability on the side of the hip. You want to work on that glute med muscle right here, and that just kind of controls keeping your hip in place as you do forward motion. So if you're on a bike and you're cycling, it's going to stabilize through here. Really good one to do is just a banded walk. You can get these bands online. You can get them at Sports Check. Pretty much any kind of sports store is going to sell them. So you can have a little bend in the knees, and you're just going to sidestep. You want to make sure that you're not rocket launching yourself with your upper body. So you're not going like this. This part's all nice and steady, and I'm using my leg to step out. Okay. It's a good one. And the longer you go, you should feel a pretty good burn. You don't want to feel it through your hip flexors. If you're feeling it through your hip flexors in the front, it means you're doing it wrong. You want to keep the toes forward, and you should feel it through your I call it your side butt right here. Okay, next one, we have a calf raise. So because especially with cycling shoes, if you use shoes to clip into your bike, the bottoms of your feet can get quite stiff. So you want to work on just some single leg calf raises like this. You can also do 2 legs if that's too hard. And I put one in the program that's 2 up and then coming nice and slow down. And you're practicing that control in your foot. It's really important to keep your feet nice and strong and flexible because they're locked in a shoe. All right. And then this one is for your hip flexors. So a lot of people think that their hip flexors are really strong. What I find is people have short hip flexors that are actually weak. Because when you think about it, if you sit down all day like this, my hip flexor is short here. So I'm gonna go over some stretching at the end on how to stretch your hip flexors, but you also wanna make sure you give them some exercise and make them do some work. So a good one you can do is sitting with your back nice and flat against a box here. And I want to make sure my sacrum, the very bottom of my pelvis, is nice and flat on the box here. And I'm going to try and lift my leg up. And it's actually quite hard to do this, even just showing that to you guys, I cramped a little bit. But being able to flex that hip at your end range of motion, because a lot of the time when you're cycling, you're cutting it a little bit short. It's about working that joint all the way to its end range. Okay, and then next one, super basic, squats. So a lot of people ask, if I cycle, why do I have to do squats? So when you're locked into a bike, a lot of times your knee will be a little bit in like this, and you get a lot of development on this inside of your quads. So it's called quads because you have 4 main muscles in the front here. You want to make sure they're nice and balanced, because you can imagine your kneecaps here is getting pulled this way by one quad and it's getting pulled this way by another quad. If this one's too tight, you're going to have it pulling inward and your kneecap isn't going to be tracking well. So you want to do squats. You want to make sure that your knees are pointing forward, and that's going to give your body an opportunity to kind of balance out a little bit and use your quads nice and evenly. So for people that go to the gym, you can add like a ball to that, right? Just holding if you want to make it a little bit harder. And then another one, this one's pretty advanced, but you can give it a try. If you're working out at home right now, like a lot of people are doing, you could do to like say a bar chair or a tall chair and just sitting down like this and stand back up, and that's a single leg squat. And the lower you get that chair, the higher or harder and harder it is. And what you want to look for is, if I would do this exercise in a mirror, I'm not getting any buckling in my knee. My knee's tracking really well right over my toe. And then that's what's called a unilateral exercise. And that's going to expose if you have a really big difference in your quad strength. So for me, I'm really right leg dominant. My left one, I can't even get close to as far as I can at my right. All right. Next one, single leg deadlift. So this is actually a really good one for balance. And what it does is it works your hamstring in the back through a full range of motion. So cyclists typically get pretty big quads, and then back here gets a little bit neglected. And that depends on kind of your pedaling mechanics and the shape of your legs and how much you're bent forwards. But you want to try and work those hamstrings to balance out the strength in the quads. And it's also a really good one for balance. So here I'm hinging forward. It's called a hip hinge, because if you pictured this was one part of the hinge and this was another, it's staying nice and flat. Oops, can't even do it, just kidding. And you want it to be nice and slow and controlled. And if you notice my back here, my back isn't rounding forward. I've got it nice and straight and coming up. And after you do a few of these, you should feel a pretty good burn in the back of your legs and in the side of your hip. Again, because these hip muscles are working to stabilize the joint. If your balance still isn't that good, you can still do this exercise. Just hold on to something. So it could be the back of a chair, foam roller. Yeah. So it's another really good one. And then just a couple for the core. So this one's a bird dog. And what I'm looking for is my right arm's going up and my left leg's going back. And I can do a few of those. And I'm looking to control my pelvis here. So I don't have any forward bottom shaking like this. It's nice and steady and reaching up. And I'm also not leaning into the hip at all. So that's another good hip control. And I don't know if you've ever been behind someone on a bike and their hips are kind of moving all over the place like this. They want to practice that one to be able to stay nice and steady. Okay, and then last two, side plank. This is the version of the plank that I like to give people. I find people do it correctly and a lot better. So I've got my knee, hip, shoulder all in line. And I'm keeping my hips up nice and high, so I don't want them down here. If this is easy, I can bring this leg up. And that actually works that the side butt muscle, the glute med, which is also really good for cycling. And then last one, just a basic front plank like this. If that's too hard, you can bring your knees down to the ground and do it like that. Okay, and then we're gonna go over some stretching. So some good ones for the hips, pigeon stretch like this. I know for people with knee problems, this can kind of be uncomfortable. So you can skip this one if you have knee problems. I'm going to show you a different one, but this is a great stretch. And I find it really gets into the hip here. And then you've got your figure 4 laying on your back, cross your leg over. That gives you a good stretch through the glute where you can go like this and get the piriformis. And those are important muscles to stretch because from sitting on a saddle, you can get a little bit of compression into those nerves. So you want to make sure those muscles are staying nice and stretched out and not pressing down on anything they shouldn't be. And then one last one, I didn't want to put, or two more, sorry, I didn't want to put too many here. Just a cat cow, and this one's good for the shoulders and the upper back. So a lot of times we're bent forwards like this with cycling. So you need to work on that extension through the back and coming up. And then of course you want to stretch your quads, and I'm going to show you guys how to stretch your quads properly, because a lot of people cheat. So you're grabbing your foot and you're pulling your heels to your bum, and what you want to make sure is you're not getting a ton of back extension. So I'm going to stand up and show you guys. If I'm stretching my quad like this, oops, and I'm going into tons of back extension here, I'm not really stretching my quad. I want to get my pelvis and I want to tuck it in like this, and that's going to pull through the front of the leg here. And you can also squeeze your bum muscles a little bit, and that's pulling right into the front. And actually, I'm going to give you guys one last one. I know I said that about the last exercise. This is a wall angel. So as long as you don't have any impingement and you can bring your arms over your head, this is a really good one. So I'm keeping my back as flat as I can against the wall, bringing my arms up to touch the mirror. And a lot of time, I mean, if you can get your elbows, wrists, and back to touch, you're flexible. Sometimes people will be a little bit more like this. But I personally like that one because you can see improvement with it. Like a lot of people will come in and they'll be like, oh my God, I can touch my wrist to the wall. So that's why I really like that one. Yeah, and then foam rolling is another one I should touch on. So foam rolling's great. It's definitely, it's kind of like stretching. It's a good thing to do, but it's kind of like not, it's not like the end of the line. You definitely have to do some exercises to work on the strengthening aspect of it. But yeah, so that's all I've got for exercises. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kathy. Did you want me to go right in and answer them?
That sounds good. I'm not sure if you can see both of us now, but thank you, Anaïs, so much for that presentation. I know I'm going to be adding some of those exercises to my routine for sure. So we do have a couple questions. I saw a few things in the chat. So people did have questions about the bike fitting. So somebody had mentioned that, you know, not very many shops offer bike fitting for recumbent bikes. Do you see that all in at all in your work? And is that something maybe that needs to be a bit more specialized?
Bike fitting for recumbent bikes. I mean, a recumbent bike, I'd say it's like, are you saying, do I know anyone specifically that does it, or how should it fit?
I think a little bit more just if you come across it and if there's things to think about.
Oh, for recumbent bikes. You know what? I actually haven't come across that question that much. I think with recumbent bikes, you would definitely have to be careful about how much you're getting quad. This part would be really important. I don't actually know of anyone who's done any fitting for it though. So yeah, I'd say it's definitely important to still have a professional look at it, because like I was saying with posture before, there's not really any kind of like bad posture, but being in certain positions for too long isn't great. So yeah, definitely paying for a fitting, but I don't know anyone who's actually done it. I haven't come across it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that was this person's point too, that there's not many places that offer that. I guess taking a look at a shop that specializes in those types of bikes, or trying to do more outreach, unfortunately, it's not as common. Somebody asked about old helmets. If it's old but hasn't been contacted or damaged, is the suggestion to get a new one because the materials degrade or because the design?
Yeah, the materials degrade in them. So I think what happens, especially with more modern ones, is the foam kind of starts to compress a little bit. So yeah, it's definitely a thing to do with the age. And I think I forgot to mention this, but especially if there's damage in it, you want to get rid of it. And sometimes it's hard to see damage as well. Like actually, I have one right here. I don't know if you guys can see this, but from just looking at it, it actually doesn't look like there's really any, I didn't even notice at first that there was damage on it. But if I kind of peel into the foam like this, I don't know if you guys can see, but there's actually a pretty good crack in it. So you especially want to throw it out if there's anything like that. But I think it is actually comes down to the age of the helmet, and there should be a stamp on it. Yeah, so for example, this one has a sticker. It says October 2017. It's 2021. So if there hadn't been a crack in it, I should be throwing it out next year.
And someone asked, I don't know if we can or not. There's a lot of parts to that, but worth.
Oh, I'm not actually sure. That's a really good question. Yeah, because you'd feel bad throwing it out. I'm not too sure about the recycling aspect of it.
Yeah, I think because it's got the plastic and styrofoam
and the foam on it. Yeah.
Someone was asking if they would be getting a list of the exercises and stretches, and I know you said that we could send that out afterwards. We'll follow up on those. Somebody asked if you have any good stretches or exercises for lower back pain during longer road rides, and the bike has been fitted for them.
Yeah, so a lot, I mean, you do want to stretch definitely as part of a routine. I think with lower back pain, you want to actually get, it comes back around to getting strong in that bent forward position. So I would say you want to strengthen yourself in a forward position. So doing things like, mind you, properly, but a set of deadlifts like this with a kettlebell, that's going to strengthen my back like in this position. So if you think about it, if you're able to, pick up 100-pound barbell repetitively a few times, being in a bent forward position isn't actually that bad because I'm used to loading myself in that position. Does that kind of make sense? And then also, I mean, you can go on forever with the exercises for that lower back that a lot of people feel with prolonged cycling. It's called your QL muscle. So if whoever asked the question is still listening, how you want to stretch that is you have a seat on a box or on a chair. You want to have one straight. So I'm going to stretch through this left side of my back. I have this side straight. and I'm gonna arch over like this. So I'm bringing my elbow down to my heel, and that should really stretch into that lower part of the back that I think cyclists typically feel with longer rides. And you wanna make sure you're not rotated forward, you're rotated back. I will put that one in the exercise sheet because it's a good exercise. I know with all these exercises, it can go on forever, but I will add that one in. So QL, stretch, and deadlifts in response to the lower back pain with exercise, with cycling.
Perfect. Somebody did comment that they took apart their helmets and that's how they were able to recycle it. And someone else said that they have a 2002 sticker on their helmet, so that one needs to go.
Yeah, I'd throw that one out. I mean, I think it was the American, some kind of American safety council that I'd looked up, and they were kind of like 5 to 10 years. The Snell organization, they do tons of research into helmets, impact, how long. They say a hard 5 years. For me, I had a pretty serious concussion last year, and I would err on the edge of caution and throw it out after 5 years, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody asked if you have any specific exercises or tips for somebody in the age group of they're, for example, 70 years old. So is there anything in particular you'd have for that age group?
I think for aging, it comes down to it's kind of more specific injuries that you would get, but the exercises that I demonstrated, especially that single leg balance, is great for 70 or like quite the even 75-year-olds coming in here just for general fitness training, and like they do a lot of the same stuff I'd give to, you know, a 30 or 40-year-olds in terms of like balance type of exercises, and then also the single leg deadlift because it's not a lot of load. Yeah, I think all the exercises I gave would be great for a 70-year-old.
Perfect.
Maybe avoid, if you're 70, kind of avoid more jumping type stuff, but we didn't do any of that today. So yeah, the sheet I give out is totally fine for someone more senior.
Sounds good. We've got a couple more questions coming in. On longer rides, I start to feel pain between my shoulder blades. Would that be because of slouching when riding, or is there any posture related reasons for that?
Yeah, I think so if the rides are like kind of like getting into like the 3+ hours, I mean, it depends on how much pain you have. As a rule of thumb, if you're holding any position, and I tell people this, especially who work in offices, if you're holding any position for a long period of time, you're gonna feel a little bit of pain. I think trying to stabilize through the shoulders, and again, I didn't put this in because I didn't want the exercise list to go on forever, but trying to stabilize those shoulder blade muscles, and it's very, questions like this are very like individual, but generally what you see is people have very poor control of these muscles in between their shoulder blades. So if you practice something like you're in this position, I'm keeping my spine super flat, can I squeeze my shoulder blades together and can I push them apart with a lot of control? I would also do types of things like probably like a set of rows and that kind of thing to strengthen those muscles in between shoulder blades. And then again, with the stretching, just like the cat cow and that kind of thing that I put in, stretching like that. Again, it's really it's a really specific question, but in general, I do see people have really weak muscles in between their shoulder blades.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Two other questions that are somewhat related. So do you have any suggestions for sore wrists and back of the forearm when cycling, and also numbness in hands? I know that can kind of happen.
Sorry, I think, what did you just say?
So we're looking for some suggestions on dealing with sore wrists and back of the forearm when riding, and also numbness in the hands.
Numbness in the hands. So again, it would depend. If you haven't had a bike fitting, I would say kind of that would be your first part, would go get a bike fitting. You want to make sure that you don't have too much weight forward into it. And then also, and I find this especially for women as well, they might think that your handlebars, because like a lot of them, the stock handlebars on bikes are quite wide. And when you're measuring someone's shoulders for handlebars, you want to make sure that you're measuring from the actual bone. So especially like women will have, you have your muscle all the way out here, but really you're measuring from the bony landmark here. And a lot of times women will need a narrower handlebar than they think. Numbness in the hands too, being in this gripped position for a long time. And again, it does come back to that kind of holding any position for a long time can irritate a nerve, but holding this for a long time can like want to work on stretching a little bit through the forearms and getting a little more flexible doing this kind of thing. But again, it's super specific, so you'd have to kind of pinpoint what the problem is. But general suggestions: handlebar width, especially for women, a little narrower, or if you're just riding with a straight handlebar, not drop handlebars, holding them a little narrower if you can. Yeah, stretching through the forearms. And a lot of time I do see, especially because we do a lot of this all day, people have a really hard time getting into this position here. So if you give yourself a quick little stretch like this, like kind of ask yourself, like, how tight are those muscles? And then again, that can cause a little compression through the nerve.
Very helpful, thank you. I think that covers all the questions in the chat. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with the group before we finish up?
I'm just like kind of thinking through this last question here. Sorry. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add at all. Yeah.
I think that probably covers everyone's questions. That's
okay.
Yes, super helpful. Thank you so much.
Oh, actually, I do have one last slide for you guys, and I don't even have to pull it off. So if you are interested in coming in for an assessment, we do give $50 off a 60-minute initial assessment for Hub members. And then also, if you were involved in any kind of collision and you have an ICBC claim, we do see quite a few cyclists and pedestrians through here for if you're in BC, insurance company BC. So yeah, just see.
Perfect, that's good to know. Well, thank you again, Anaïs. And if you want to get in touch with Anaïs, you can reach her at Symmetrix, and you can see her contact info on that slide. And as we said, we will send out that information by PDF, so you can contact her in the future. And yeah, I think that's everything. A few comments coming in, just saying thank you. It's much appreciated, Anaïs.
Yeah, I hope everyone learned something.
Yes, please make sure that you register for Hub's Go by Bike Week, because that begins on May 31st. And as I said at the beginning, you can sign up and check it out on bikehub.ca. I know there's going to be a number of other webinars as well, which will cover some useful information. If you want to get more involved in Hub and cycling, you can join Hub as a member for as little as $15 a year and help us make biking safer and better all across Metro Vancouver. You can also check out many cycling education courses that Hub carries, and volunteer at a Hub local committee in your neighborhood, or make a charitable donation to Hub, or see some of the other events that we've got going on. And you can check those out at our website, bikehub.ca. And so now we're at the end of the webinar. Our facilitators will leave the meeting open for a few minutes longer for anyone that wants to leave comments in the chat. And thank you again to Anaïs. It's been really informative and helpful. And thank you everyone for participating.